topics. We've had the topic of unpredictable, and now the topic of panic. But to explain that, I want to invite up our panelists who are here. We have Ivor Terret, founder and general manager, Enablement Advisors; Joel Whittaker, head of high risk at Reuters; Thomas Geppert, CEO of PIC Security Solutions GmbH; Scott Hamer, retired inspector of royalty and specialist protection, formerly of the Metropolitan Police. We will have Jacquie Davies, operations director at Optimal Risk, and our panel is moderated by the president of IPSB, Mr. Charles Randolph. So please give him a round of applause, and we very much look forward to it.
Thank you, sir. First off, thanks everybody for being here. We were talking in the hallway. All this that we're doing is great. I think most people recognize that, but the actual juice is out there talking. I mean, Stanley Crystal said it takes a network to defeat a network. This is your network. Keep it going. Don't ever stop. Don't hang out with your friends. Meet somebody new. Take a card away. Pelham, thank you so much for hosting this, and Optimal Risk and all the people who volunteer to put this together. It's not lost on me, the president of the IPSB, what it takes to put a conference together so that we can all come and network and fight the bad guys. So panic in technology. Is it a burden or a boom? Let's get right into things with Ivor. Ivor, tell me a little bit about yourself and tell me what your thoughts are about panic in technology.
Thanks, Chuck. So, good morning, everyone. It's great to see familiar faces and to reconnect with old friends and make new friends and colleagues. So that's quite a loaded question, Chuck.
Indeed.
So, I think a lot of the time, both sides of the coin panic with technology. So, how can we panic with, or at what aspects are we panicking with technology as the industry, as people, as the users of technology? One, too much information. Two, the inability to process the information. And three, and overriding everything else, not really understanding why we need or want the information. I think that causes a lot of panic. And during this panel, what I want all of you to think, sort of at the back of your minds while you're listening to us speak, is think, why are you using technology? What is it giving you? How is it helping you mitigate and manage risk that you can't mitigate? And is it actually helping with that, or is it creating a burden? Another thing with technology I'll touch on in just a second, and I'll pass the mic, is you call it a burden. I call it it's often used as a crutch, as an excuse, right? When things don't go as planned, what's the first thing we blame? Right? The technology.
I blame Chris Story always.
Well, the $6 million man, there you go. So what do we blame? Technology. Comms failed. We didn't see the tracker. This wasn't working. That wasn't working, right? So how much of our core skills are we resting on technology and putting aside? By the way, I'm a technology geek. I love technology. I worked in a startup. I sit on the board of several tech companies. I absolutely love technology. But we need to understand that our job is much bigger than technology. Technology needs to be a tool that serves us. We shouldn't be serving the technology.
Yeah, those are some really good points. And I will say that, who was it? Historian Christian Lang said technology is a useful servant, but a dangerous master. Scott, what say you? Ivor's kind of give us a bit of the doom and gloom. Can you counter that?
Yeah, I think so. For me, I think I said it in, not this room, but certainly in this building last year. Technology, certainly from a close protection point of view, is your friend and it's also your foe. Brings numerous benefits. I think sometimes this profession's been going on for thousands of years, putting people behind other people. That will always continue, and I think we need to use technology to enhance that, but also be aware of the things that can be used against us. It's been spoken in this room today as well. What else? Yeah, I think that's it for an opening.
Okay. Jacquie, what do you have? I listened to your story before about finding the person. I remember you telling me that before, and glad that we're able to do that. So what's your thoughts on technology? Do you think does it hinder us or does it help us in our job?
It can do both. I mean, I'm a progressive dinosaur. You know, that's because I'm old. I wasn't brought up with technology. You know, when I was in the police, it was shoe leather. You know, you had to go round and knock on people's doors, where now you just sit in front of a computer. In my experience, don't forget the old skills. The guys talked about that on the other panel. Yeah. I've been in the middle of the Nevada desert with no signal, and went back to relying on map reading. So technology is great, but overuse, and it can make operators panic. On a surveillance side of things, it's like with a tracker. A tracker can tell you where the person's gone, but they can't tell you who they've met.
Right.
So you've got to have the human element in there as well.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I love that. I remember I started out, most people think I came into the business through the military. I actually came in as a private investigator, and I worked in Chicago. And I remember when the first time that I was able to buy CD-ROMs. Does anybody remember those? Yeah. They had the white pages in the U.S., and I thought, man, we have arrived. And then I was able to get on my modem there, and I thought, here we go. But nothing ever, I mean, kids call it phishing now. We call it pretexting. And nothing beats the good old shoe leather and making sure that you understand that.
Are you not old enough to remember floppy disks?
Oh, I remember. If you, that's how you know you get a email from me, and I'm on my cell phone. It says sent for my Commodore 64. Joel, you have an interesting position, I think, because many of us here are thinking in terms of close protection, one person, maybe a family. You're responsible for a plethora of individuals that are out, many in high-risk situations because they have to for their job. What are your thoughts on technology?
Hi everyone, it's Joel Whittaker from Reuters. As you said there kindly, I look after the high risk desk at Reuters. It's a difficult one. I mean, technology you can't live without it now. You need it. It works in so many ways, as the panel's described so far. But my thoughts are, and particularly around panic, is that you've always got those backup systems in place. I mean, you mentioned there, map reading. I haven't been able to read a map, even if the GPS fails, like 100%. So it's just having that for me. And often I have teams that work in, incredibly remote environments where the risk is very high. It's that they've got the systems in place, not only technologically wise, but also like mentally, right? So they're mentally prepared to be able to, first of all, continue their task, so to get the story, but to do it safely, to be able to get out of that situation, that country safely without tech. It's not that difficult. In our industry, we've been doing it for decades, right? It's only really the last 10, sort of 15 years that tech's really started to take off. So, and I think that what that does, just to relate that to panic, is it gives you a level of confidence that if the tech fails, well, it's okay because I know I've got the map in my back pocket or whatever it is. You've got that analog system as a backup. I think that's probably
that's interesting.
Right, yeah.
I don't know why when you were talking about that, I was thinking about what they call the ghost buzz.
Right.
If anybody's ever done that, like you're so used to having your cell phone in your pocket or your wristwatch or whatever, every once in a while you feel that buzz. You don't have to admit that it happens. I know it happens to all of you. It's fine. And you're like, oh, wait, my phone's not there.
Yeah.
It's just, I'm so used to answering something or so used to thinking back if you think about pagers or something. Thomas, I'd like you to add on to this. I mean, you've been on multiple sides of the fence. You ran large corporation. You've also been an independent contractor, and now you have your own business. I mean, what are your thoughts on your swath of experience in terms of technology? Is it a boon or is it a burden?
Well, thank you for being here. Yes, you're right. I had many hats on my head. I was 16 years head of corporate security for the stock exchange, and now I'm doing my own shop. So I was either contracting EP agents around the world, or now I'm doing it myself as a contractor. Technology and panic. I would say we are the old guys in the EP world are not panicked by technology because we can rely on our background, on our traditional skills, on our old school skills. We can read a map. We can talk to people, not only text to people. I just came back from a job, and when you're involved in an operation with a GSOC, it's even more difficult than before, because The GSOC is used to text all the time. They don't talk. The client got an injury on the plane while he arrived. So I was the agent on the ground, and I was talking to him. And the guy said, "You're the first one asking me how I feel, if I'm in pain or whatever." So empathy and humanity is much more important in the EP world than technology. Technology is there to help us, but not to master us.
I think that's a good point. There, for a while, there's this panic of like, it's gonna take jobs away from us. We heard this earlier, but I think in fact it enhances. If you think about protective intelligence space for a minute, in my day-to-day job, I'm the chief security officer for ONTIC Technologies, and we contemplate and think about this all the time. But if we can get technology to help us focus on what's important to us, which is operational planning, situational awareness, taking care of the principal, be it surveillance or some operational task that we're doing, and the technology can deliver 60% of that solution to us. I think it was Chris earlier was talking about ChatGPT. Let's think if you're out there, you're an individual contributor, you're collecting all this telemetry, and we need to put a report together, but I've also got 5 or 6 other gigs on that I'm looking at, and I can get the AI to come in and say, Chuck, here's 60% of the work, so you can spend the 40% of analysis. You can, now walk with me on this, you can spend 100% of that 40% that you have on that analysis. So I'm not wasting my time looking at Google page 5 or looking out on Reddit or somewhere else. It's all delivered to me, and I can focus on what I need to do. Because in those moments, there might be something very important, especially if you're dealing with threats. I'd like to ask y'all about something else too. I'm a Texan, so I will say y'all, my pronoun is Texan. I'd like to ask you all something though. If we think, again, in the old days, you know, many here have experienced a detail in which you're given a report, you fold it up, put it in your pocket. I loved it. I could write notes on it. Now, if I didn't want people to talk to me, I'd open it up like I was looking at it. People would leave me alone. But we would receive a report. But now, everyone in this room, if you're on a detail, you're a point of telemetry. You're part of the intelligence cycle. You're part of the operational cycle. There's no break. It's continuous. What you see, we heard earlier, like, you know, we were talking about Davos, and you know, I've been there many times when they say, "Oh my gosh, it's panic. There's a riot. And there's only 4 people on a sign. It's just the angle of which somebody took a picture because they need to sell ad space." What's your thoughts? We'll just go back to Thomas. What's your thoughts in terms of utilizing the agents now as telemetry? They're giving information. Do we as agents have a duty to maintain contact with the GSOC or with somebody else and give all types of ancillary information, not just things that are happening to the principal?
I think it's important that the boots on the ground give information because they see more than the GSOC. But not all the time. Do not over-communicate. Do not over-inform, because this is a big problem. The GSOC texts you all the time to the agent on the ground. Hey, where are you now? When is the ETA? When is this? What are you seeing? What are you doing? And if you're solo working, not in a team, it's too much information, it's too much communication. You can't do it. You have to concentrate on your main task, the security or the safety of the client, and not informing the GSOC all the time. You can do it when you have time for that, but not permanently.
Jackie, I'd like to ask you, give us from the practitioner's point of view, if you will. Like, I'm boots on the ground, shoe leather. Do agents experience fear of missing out, FOMO now, because we're so used to getting information all the time that when I don't know what to do, I pull my phone out because otherwise I feel awkward just standing here?
That is absolutely true, both in CP and in surveillance. On surveillance, some operators can be a complete nightmare. So your subject of inquiry could be somebody who works for a computer company. So what you cannot do is start searching their name, and that is every operator's first thing. When they get their brief, it's like, oh,
Yep.
Who are we looking at? Because you're leaving a footprint.
Right.
And if he works for a computer company, he knows how to look for footprints. So trying to explain to operators, you can't do that. You know, at the beginning of the briefing, you are not allowed to Google this person. and there is a specific reason for it. And the trouble with operators, fear of missing out, fear of not telling the TL, or, for me, I'm the operations director, so everything gets reported back to me from the TLs. I want my operators to tell the TL to run the log, and then I get that log. What I don't want is every 10 minutes my WhatsApp going off because, he's just turned a corner into, Coventry Street. For goodness sake,
Careful.
I don't care.
Ivor's about to have a meltdown when you just said I'm getting text.
But so fear of missing out is a big thing that you have to knock out, literally, of operators.
Yeah, it's interesting, and he's actually in the room. I remember when I worked for a corporation, at one point we realized, because we could, and Ross is here, we sent Ross out with the CP teams just to understand what was needed and what they were seeing. And also we came back and we taught the CP team, hey, look, we know when you get in and you don't have anything to do, you're going to Google search or Bing search or whatever you're going to search, Yahoo if that's still a thing, and you're going to search the principal's name. Let me give you some rudimentary training on what to do so it'll enhance the protective intel function on it. Because oftentimes I think we get out there, and as CP folks, we're so used to being the end all. Like if you think about it, if you were in a corporation and you, sir, you're the lead now, you're the executive, something happens, the executive's not going to call back to the office and say this and that. He's going to go, tell me what's happening here. And all of a sudden, you need to know everything that you need to know about Ukraine and your situation in Ukraine and what your supply chain is. And all of a sudden, you go from CP to risk manager to risk leader. And anyone that says, I'm just a body person, brother, I'm here to tell you, you're not. You're the communication point, you're the single point of failure and the single point of communication for an executive. So Ivor, I know you want to answer this WhatsApp and this text thing. So can we, and wait for it, can we enable, see what I did there? Can we enable our teams to be better telemetry points and help the protective intelligence function?
Thank you for both. A few things. First, we have to understand, going to text messaging, why do we need to communicate information and to who? And what I tell people, whether we're running an operational detail or whether I'm teaching, is before you send a message, ask yourself, one, if now's the right time, and we'll circle back to this, and two, what will the ramification be if I don't send this message? If the answer is that there is a ramification, you need to send a message. If the answer is that nothing will happen if I don't send the message, then don't send the message. Concentrate on your job. It's a very simple trick. Something I also do, and I recommend you do with your teams, whether you're training or in ops, when you're debriefing for the day, ask your team members, go through the messages you sent, count your messages, tell me how many there were in total, tell me how many were necessary. And you'll see there'll be hundreds of messages, of which 10 or 12 were necessary. So it's a very interesting thing that I like to do. The other thing is, as far as an intel point, absolutely boots on the ground are the most efficient sources of intel, without a doubt.
Yeah, absolutely.
Better than a search engine, better than anything else. We're on the ground. We know if we're out of our home country, we're working with a local, we can say, what's going on? What do you think of this? And we can send that information up. What's critically important is to understand what is important for me to send right now and what's important for me to send later. What can wait? And that goes to the text messaging.
Yeah, think about this for a minute. If we were Uber and by laws, international laws, GDRP, everything, we were able to let our drivers think if we were able to query the driver. We know that there's a riot on this block and we know there's like 25 drivers, and all of a sudden we're able to get a plethora of information that would come back, get served into a data lake. That data lake would automatically start looking for points of interest, and then through something like OpenAI, put out a report or a basic bolo that says, here's what we know about everything in this area. Now we can start, as I've heard somebody say before, instead of looking for the needle in the haystack, we can start conceptualizing the haystack.
Fantastic. So with regards to text messaging, and this is something that's prevalent across the world, regardless of age group, even graybeards like myself and the young folks alike, when the principal is doing something, the team gets on their fucking phones, excuse my language, gets on their fucking mobile devices and texts a message saying, principal has arrived, principal's departed, principal's getting out the car, principal's picking their nose, whatever it is. Folks, those are the critical times when your eyes need to be up and around. Don't forget your job. Your job is protection, not surveillance, unless you're doing surveillance. Right? If we're doing surveillance, it's one thing. But at that critical time, when there's a predictable movement of the principal, you need to be eyes up, not watching and reporting on the principal, but you need to be watching and looking for where a threat can come from. And if your eyes are down at your phone, not only does it take you out of the game, it takes out whoever you're sending the message to out of the game. So if you're lucky and you've got a team of 3 or 4 people, those people are going to be checking their phones as well. So now you've got your whole team that's looking down and not up.
Try this at one time. When you're in a crowd, it's just like the yawn. Just do this at one point. Right now, at least 2 people are like, I should check my phone, because he pulled his phone out. Try it somewhere when you're in a crowd and just look around and be observant of how many people will pull their phone out, just because it's natural. I mean, we now have people coming in the industry that, look, I feel like I was fortunate enough to experience Moore's Law and see things change exponentially. Some might say Moore's Law really isn't so important anymore, but I think we have a problem with humans catching up with Moore's Law. But as we transgress, as we transverse the CP continuum, we now have people that are coming into the industry that have never been without a supercomputer in their pocket. Now, is that doom? Is that gloom? I'm not sure, but Scott, let's go to you for a minute. How do we? I'll come back to you.
Well, I want to finish that point.
You got 2 seconds. Go.
3 seconds.
2.
I've lost my point, Chuck.
See,
I've got stage
I'll come back
fright.
to you.
You killed me.
I will
man.
come back to you. Scott, I'm curious, just from your observations, how do we have a culture of FOMO, we have a culture of tech, we have a culture of TikTok, Instagram. Does anybody use Facebook? Quick show of hands. Okay. Does anybody, Facebook, LinkedIn, we have to constantly feel this need to check the news, everything. How do we train this out of people? Can we?
I think it's really difficult. Certainly from my background, for me, as a team leader, as a manager, no news is good news. I don't want to hear about it unless, Ivor, you've already said that is the message necessary. Also experience. I think if you're new to the business, you want to impress, you want to show your bosses, your employer that you're doing a good job. Again, I'm from old school. Look, you don't have to show me you're doing a good job. I know whether you're doing a good job from my experience over the years. So if you're quiet and nothing's happening for a day, nothing's happening. You're still earning your pennies. Good friend of mine in the military always used to have this phrase, stay in lane. That's your task. Crack on with it. Your boots on the ground. Keep your boots on the ground. There's a manager back at the operations centre who's doing that side. There's an intel manager who's taking all that information and creating it into some sort of intelligence, hopefully for you. It's also very difficult. I came from a high-profile background. My last assignment was with the King, as he is now, as Prince of Wales he was. Work with politicians, other members of the royal family. My teams, a lot of the information we do pass QuickTime. Some of it will be on the radio. Some might be in an earpiece. It might be an environment you can't use that. Some has to go on the phone. And of course, then you've got a professional protection officer, and the PAPs will love this. So you get your phone out, you check it, bang. Now that goes out to everybody, doesn't it? Everyone in the he's not doing his job properly, But sometimes it's a medium of genuine exchange. You just happen to be caught at the wrong time. So in a professional context, I would always try my very, very best to not check tech when you're out in public or when someone can comment on your whether you're doing it right or not.
It's really about understanding requirements or explaining maybe to the young CP practitioners or the team, like, look, we have intelligence requirements. They're pushed. Whether we have an analyst on board or not, we know what we're interested in because we've done a good op plan. And I like your idea of, like, just crack on with what you have. In the U.S. military, we have this thing, push to talk, release to think. People get on the mic and they keep talking, keep talking, keep talking, keep talking, keep talking. Nobody could respond. So if you knew you were, as a young second lieutenant, I remember somebody coming back going, Lieutenant Randolph, push to talk, release to think. I was like, oh, fair enough. And I think we experience that now with tech, that version of I just need to be on and need to be on. Joel, do you have a different perspective? Because again, you're not dealing with one individual. You have a swath of people that you have to know about. Is there an opposite side of this discussion?
That's a tough question, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think that those principles are, they go across all industries really. That, you know, what you say has to be thoughtful, has to count, it has to matter, and we just need to get that across in a very short, succinct way. And that doesn't matter if you're a close protection operative on the ground, or you're a stringer, like a photographer on investigative report, Nigeria, somewhere like that, under surveillance. That perhaps the means of communication, so encryption or things like that, change. But I think the principles, I feel, probably remain the same. Keep it tight, and make it meaningful.
Let me ask you a question. How do you manage, if you could say it, if you can't, just we'll move on, but how do you manage dealing with all the various countries and the tech? Because at any given time, you might have 20 people out in 20 different countries. That's 20 different pieces of tech, 20 different laws that you have to deal with, yet you're still required to figure out, keep people safe and keep updated. I mean, how do you kind of manage that personally?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to make a quip, but I won't actually. But I guess just stay across it, right? I mean, so this morning I had a stringer from a West African country, and he's just about to go back into a country now, and it's potentially problematic because of the stories that he's been involved in. And so how do we keep the communications flowing so that I know he's safe, basically, right? So it's using, there's loads of obviously open source apps out there that we can use. So it's just staying up to date. It's much like everyone here today, in part, obviously a big networker, but it's also to look at the different technologies that you've got set up next door and to be across that. And mostly that's kind of like peer reviewed, right? So it's working with your buddies and things like that and finding out what's worked, what actually was a bit, that just didn't really work for us. And then just trying to hone it down so it's the most efficient, bit of communication that you can get. And it does change, Yeah. That answered it fully enough.
Thomas, you had you had a GSOC before you started PIC. You had a GSOC when you worked for the exchange. I mean, how did you think about building that GSOC to make it future-proof for technology without making it become a burden?
Well, first of all, we're a small boutique company. To have a GSOC in the background costs a fortune. You have to have there someone at least 24/7, at least one person 24/7. At the moment, I use my old contacts and call them whenever I need a favor, and they still owe me a lot of favors as I was the boss there. So setting up a GSOC is a very good thing, but it's also very cost intensive.
So when you consider a GSOC, say at your last company when you were at the exchange, and you consider all that, because you and I have talked before about what's your day like, what did you monitor, what did you look at, what was the primary concern in terms of, or if you were setting one up today, what would you look at in terms of tech that's important or tech that's going to cause problems in the operation?
Good question. It depends on the client, it depends on the threat, it depends on the country probably, what to look at exactly. But if you have a multinational client, you need to make sure that all the offices or plants are geo-fenced with all the social media monitoring, things like that. You need to know about severe weather changes, severe traffic problems. It's a lot of things you have to look into. Riots, protests,
it really brings the concept of all hazards back.
Yeah.
And you have to have technology that's going to monitor. And again, if we're talking GSOCs generically, Global Security Operations Center, Virtual Security Operations Center, Risk Intelligence Center, Risk Monitoring Center, really kind of boiling down like what is it that we're functioning here and what is it that's going to give us the most bang for the buck so we can manage those requirements. Because often I've seen many that will we have all this other tech we're going to stack on top of it. You get new folks come in, the tech doesn't work together. Next thing you know, you're spending more time trying to pull 5 different reports from 6 different places, when in fact you've overburdened yourself.
At the end of the day, you still need a person
Exactly.
who's sorting out all this multiple channels, all this multiple informations you get, and sort it out for the client, for the boot on the ground.
Yep.
Because if the client is in Frankfurt and my EP agents are in Frankfurt, I don't need to know what's going on in Hamburg
Right.
or in Munich. I need to know it as close as possible to where it happens.
Well, again, that's sometimes you need an operator to walk in and say, hey, what do you think? Look at everything we built. And then the operator comes in and says, don't need this, don't need that, don't care about this, not useful to me. These are the 3 things right here that we need to focus on.
Sorry, Chuck, can I
Jackie?
just come
Yeah.
into that? Because one thing we have here in London, and this was set up by John Morrison. I don't know
Fish
if
and
he's,
chips?
if he's in the room. Well, we have fish and chips, yeah. But one of the things we have is we have what we call the London Intelligence Group. And so all the companies that are here, we all work together. We're all grown-ups and, you know, we all pass around people and clients. And one thing that John set up was the intelligence group. And what happens is the boots on the ground, they'll go, oh, just passing an accident in Park Lane. That goes on. And then every other CP team that's operating with different companies gets that intelligence. He'll put on, if we know that, I don't know, Just Stop Oil are going to be on the gantries of the M25, we know about it prior. And so really, it's our own, if you can imagine ways for CP, it's happening, the operators are putting it on the ground, and it's sort of like your mobile SOC, really.
No, it's great. If you think about it, it's open source. I mean, we're creating our own closed-loop open source intelligence network. Ivor, let me ask you a question. Come back to you because I'm curious to know, what does tech give us?
Fantastic. So let me give the group here 5 seconds to just think amongst yourselves, why do we use tech? And see if you can come up with an answer, right? So we can come up with answers and say, well, it tells us that there's an email, it tells us there's a phone call, it tells us, but why do we use tech? What's the actual point of using tech as a risk manager or mitigator? And the answer is very, very simple. Technology, on the whole, gives us information, and the information it gives us can be used as a warning for other people or for what we do. That's the bottom, most basic line of what tech gives us. So if we're using a radio to communicate something, we might be warning we're communicating information, or a cell phone, right? Keep that in mind when we're looking at tech as a crutch, or what did you call it, as something that helps us or defeats us in a sense. Is it a
boom or a burden?
A boom or a burden, right? So what is tech? Where does it fall into our risk mitigators? We've got, when we look at risk management and mitigation, and I'll keep this very short, we've got 4 main factors. We've got physical means, technology, people, and procedures. All of those have to work together to effectively manage risks that we cannot mitigate. And we need to know technology's place. Technology is not, as was said by my esteemed panel members, technology does not make decisions, and technology does not act on decisions. We do. We need to remember that.
Scott, what would you add to that? What does tech give us?
I think what it gives us in this day is access, for sure. Again, that can be a positive and a negative. You think years ago, if you wanted to, surveil somebody, it cost money. You had to have equipment. It was probably government sponsored or government based. Now you can nip down to Apple. You can get one of these things. I've dropped it in someone's bag today, so I will find out where you live. Just prove it. Dead easy. It's the 35 quid, a little bit cheaper in the States, I believe. $28 and all that. But yeah, tech is there. So anybody can literally track any of us with stuff that you can buy in a shop for a couple of quid. Now, it doesn't matter what level you work at. You can be working with government level, your sports watch, your going for a run. Absolutely anything tech can be used against or for you. Now, we've talked about some of the positives, but you've got to flip that around and think about some of the disadvantages. And some people, I think one of the earlier speakers, surveillance, Jackie's mentioned surveillance a lot. I think it's a few years ago, a colleague of mine, she worked in surveillance, she had no social media, no online presence whatsoever. And you don't need one, but you can still track you. Now, I knew she did runs, I knew she'd recently been in a 10K in the New Forest, and I knew there'd be a photographer. Google it, New Forest 10K, there's your name. Photographer, A. Smith Photography. There's your face, there's your bib number, yeah. Google, company's house, I've got your name, I've got your rough date of birth from that. Okay, let's have a little look. She was a on the management company for a block of flats she lived in. She didn't know she was a director. You know, the companies, the sports things put her online. She sold a house recently. I've got a photo of a bedroom. Yeah, so all these things you might keep off social media and be really strict on it, but you can't stop other people putting things on. And that's, as we've already discussed today, where you'll get caught out.
I want to shift to another question before we give some time for some audience interaction here as well. And Jackie, we'll just go to you since you're next. I mean, we have a conundrum. Look, you mentioned like you had a friend, she didn't have social media presence. Let's be honest, we're at a time now where if you don't have a social media presence, that's weird. If you have too much of a social media presence, that's weird. So how do we have this balance of I'm a practitioner, but I also have a personal brand? Not, you know, let's not conflate personal brand with I want to be an influencer. My 12-year-old's dying to be a TikTok influencer. Not going to happen. But how do we as people now come to grips with the fact that, look, I'm a practitioner, but I also have a personal brand that I need to put out there, which is part of a networking thing we do. What's your advice to people?
Do you know, this really comes down to training. So when people send their CV to me because they want a job, first thing I do, obviously, is I look on social media. And if they've got a huge social media presence, standing next to some jet or a Rolls Royce that quite clearly doesn't belong to them, but, or, you know, they're standing next to whoever the latest celebrity is, they're never going to work for me, because if they do that, you know, they'll do it all the time. And of course we have this thing called NDAs, don't we? Non-disclosure agreements, which people never seem to read and think it doesn't mean anything. So it really is down to training at the very, very core. When people do their training courses to come into EP, they need to be taught by the trainers what is and isn't acceptable. I understand you can, you have a brand, you are your own brand, you know, and I totally understand that, but you can go on to things like LinkedIn and write a really decent article without, you know, saying, you know, I was looking after Fred Blogs last week. You can write a sensible article. You can ask a sensible question. I mean, we're all on LinkedIn and we all answer people's questions, don't we? And we all write articles. So there's nothing stopping you doing that. Just stop doing the Facebook, the TikTok, you know, that side of social media is bad for our operators.
I agree, and I do think we have seen the industry really professionalize, I think, a lot over the last 5 years due to things like this conference, things that like the IPSB, EP Access, and EP Squared, things people are doing to say, let's raise the discussion. Joel, I'm clear I want you to kind of weigh in on this because you work for Reuters, you see things a little differently. What would be your advice as you look at people who want to work for you or look at people in the audience or in the greater industry to say, hey, kid, here's how you balance your personal brand with your professional operation?
Yeah. I think I would back up what Jackie said there, in that it's almost untenable to be in the industry, really, and have an outspoken media presence. I don't know if that's 100% correct, but I could use an example. So we use close protection operatives, though we don't call them that. Sometimes, particularly like Ukraine, right? Where we kind of need that military experience to go alongside with our journalists, where it's quite dynamic. And there have been instances where we've seen social media posts that are problematic, and so you might have someone expressing an opinion, right, it just doesn't sit well. It wouldn't sit well with a commercial firm. It certainly doesn't sit well with like a global media firm. It doesn't sit well at all. So that person's out of there, right? So I kind of think it has to just be a flat line.
Mm-hmm.
It's just my opinion, but
Yeah.
that actually, you know, you can't, your social media presence, and it doesn't matter if you separate it, if you have your own personal account and you've got a works account, because you'll be found out, obviously, on your personal account, right, by any number of people. So kind of like, you kind of got to have an acceptance that if you want to be a professional in this industry, then, you know, you've got to temper any social media, and like, you can have, you know, perfectly good.
Well, if you want to consider something that's frightening, you know, we can talk about this at the break over a cup of coffee, but if you think about quantum, why do we care about quantum? Well, and this is open source, I'm not giving anything away, the Chinese government's been recording the internet. So what? Well, they have a lot of secrets, passwords on it, they can't break them. When quantum computing comes, that's all secrets are out. What do we care now? Now they can build a profile. We can take that pocket lint, and in the background, we can run the quantum and see all the things that are linked to one person, because at the end of the day, all we need to do is get the Ivor and maneuver him to walk us in the door. We don't need to send ninjas in to do an inside job or a black bag job or to break in. All we need to do is get the Ivor. I know it wouldn't, but, and then walk in. So just contemplate that as you think about building your personal brand. I want to take, do we have questions from the audience? Or does anybody have something they'd like to add to their own, you know, personal, yes, sir?
So, hi, from America. Well, I'm here, but not original.
Mr. Bond, what's your question?
So, you know, speaking to the media piece in Reuters, we have we close protection for media companies out of Canada or whatever. One of my guys, who's no longer there, took a picture of civil unrest that he was involved in. No client, nothing, but he was involved in. So
He was doing civil unrest.
He was in there. He took a picture of it. Hey, look at me, I'm working. He made friends with the reporter from Canada. She commented on the page, "Great to meet you." That's all it said. Very quickly, though, clicking on that profile, clicking on her dad's profile, found her house, found her kids, and then I put that forward to our guy and said, "See what happened here."
What was his response?
Oh my gosh, I didn't think about that, because even removing that, I didn't tag her in it. Well, she commented.
Right.
It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that that's who it was.
That's interesting in terms of unanticipated consequences. And it
On a
goes back to,
personal account.
yeah, it goes back to what Jackie says, like, this needs to be trained, and we might put a challenge out to training companies, regardless of where you sit in the world, to add this piece to it. The unanticipated consequences of friending, I guess maybe would be the article. Feel free to write that. Anybody want to comment to that statement? Yes, sir.
I think a big part of this as well is you've got to think of who you're looking after. Certainly from my background, you're looking after ministers whose whole purpose in life is to self-generate interest on some occasions. Depending where you are, and I can think, briefing a senior government minister who didn't usually get protection was going out to Afghanistan, Pakistan. First thing he and his spads did when they arrived in Islamabad was, "Great to be here, great to be meeting, this is our programme." You think, thanks very much. So that's somebody, they've been briefed, but of course they're there to meet people, they're there to, sell UK PLC, get all that, but, it's kind of ruined the operation slightly. Flip that on its head in the same place, same time. Just about to leave the High Commission, car's on the door, boom. That sound some of us will have witnessed. You know what it is exactly. I'm in the centre of UK PLC in Islamabad. I've got access to all information and good intelligence. But where do I get my first information from? What's happened? Twitter. It's literally a little bit like the Atos scenario.
Yeah.
Somebody on the ground has told me and sent pictures out exactly where that bomb's just gone off. So, two different sides to the coin there.
As we move to close, I'd just say let's start with you, Thomas, and I go back to the original question: technology, boon or burden? What's your final thoughts on this?
It's both. And what technology, the question before was what technology gives me. It gives me another set of hands, set of ears, set of eyes, and my brain should sort it out, do I need it or not?
That's good. Joel?
Yeah, I think boom. I think with probably the burden is constant vigilance, right? That has to be employed.
I think it can be a boon, but the burden is on the operator.
So where would you say we are? I mean, and I realize like Boon and Burden, that's a softball. Everybody here is like, or cricket ball, soccer, ball. Can I say that? But where do you think we are right now with technology? Like today, if we looked out there, is technology helping us, or are we still at a point where we're struggling with it?
It can help us, but I struggle with the amount of stupidity that people rely on it. It's my honest answer.
It's like an old sergeant major told me once, sir, it ain't the army that's messed up, it's all the people in the army that are messed up. So perhaps it's our own selves, and I think it was mentioned earlier, us coming to grips with technology and how it can support us.
What we all need to remember in this room, we're all on the same side, yeah? We are all close protection or surveillance, but we're all security and we're all on the same side. And instead of just thinking about yourself and your principle, when you're putting stuff out there, think about the other teams that are out there,
Absolutely.
the other principles that are out there. We had this on LinkedIn last year when I ripped a girl to pieces in the end because she wouldn't take the advice. There was Jeremy Clarkson had a picture of him on a boat, and this young lady put up, oh, that must have been taken at such and such a time off of this harbour, so he must be staying at this villa. And she'd done that to go, look how clever I am, what I've worked out from that photo. Where I then had to point out, thanks very much, that's our client. You've now put him at risk, my team at risk, and the burglars can now go break into the villa.
And you become a POI.
Yeah, and you're a twat. So, it's...
I was trying to be nicer about it.
Well, I'm not.
But it is. I go back to us figuring it out, us coming to grips with it, us. I think it's interesting you said we're all in it together. Look, there's enough work out there for all of us. Think about that. There's enough work for all of us to work. So you're right. The more we put out there, the more the zeitgeist becomes what we want it to be. And I go back to that unanticipated consequence. If I did this and I didn't think about it, gosh, I'm sorry. Well, a little too sorry now. Scott, thoughts? Boon, Burden, where are we right now?
Boonden.
I love that.
Yeah, it works with us, it works against us, friend and foe, and as much as I try not to rely heavily on it in operational circumstances, the reality is you've got to. It's just one of those kind of unwelcome friends that you've got to embrace.
Awesome. Ivor, last word to you.
I'll keep it
before
short.
we turn it over to TSCM.
I'll keep it short, Jack. So first understand what the problem is you're trying to solve with the technology. If you understand and think about how you're going to use technology to solve the problem, then it will become we call it a boon, not a burden. Using technology for the sake of technology will undoubtedly make your operations more complex and become a burden. That's one. With regards to social media, 30 seconds. Just like I said with the text messaging, understand if there'll be ramifications, and if there will be text message, the opposite with social media. Think if there'll be ramifications, and if there will be, do not post it. Social media is often used by all of us as humans to self-validate or to get external validation for what we're doing, as with the boat and the Jeremy Clarkson incident. Don't fall into that trap. We shouldn't need external sources of validation on social media as protection professionals.
All right, there you've heard it. Ladies and gentlemen, Ivor Terret, Joel Whittaker, Thomas Geppert, Scott Hammer, and Jacquie Davies. Thank you for spending an hour with us.